There we go. Okay. All right. Here we go. We have Timothy B. Lee, famous for full stack economics, which he has abandoned in order to jump into the AI pool, as it were. Um, so why don't we just start out by getting a little bit more of an introduction? Uh, sort of when did you become someone interested in economics?
Um, Hi, I'm happy to be here. I wouldn't say I've abandoned the newsletter, but it's on hold while I focus on AI. And I've been interested in economics, I guess most of my adult life. So in college, I would say more libertarian than I am now. I was pretty libertarian and was involved in campus activism and read a lot of like libertarian books and stuff. And so Yeah, so I've been interested since college and even high school a little bit in policy, and economics is a big part of that. And then after college, I got a job at the Cato Institute doing one of these kind of entry level jobs where I was like writing a newsletter and stuff. I was in the think tank world for a few years, but I studied computer science in college, and so then I started looking for ways to kind of combine those interests and doing journalism. Focused on initially tech policy, but over the years I've covered technology and I've covered economics.
Okay. That raises a bunch of fun questions, one of which is, so what was your entry point to libertarianism?
Um, I read a lot of Ayn Rand, so that was probably a big factor. My father had pretty
The joke, it
libertarian.
always starts with Ayn Rand or something.
Yeah, so I read a lot of mostly her. Actually, I read more of her nonfiction than her fiction. I liked her novels, okay, but yeah, I always liked her nonfiction. My father was pretty libertarian and subscribed to Reason magazine for a number of years, so read some Reason. So it was probably overdetermined that I would be interested in, and I was a programmer and stuff, so I was sort of in
Yeah.
a demographic that frequently gets interested in libertarianism.
And you say you've backed off of that some? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there's been any like dramatic change, but just as I've gotten older and learned more about the world, I think libertarians have good insights about some aspects of the world, but I just think the world's complicated, and sometimes I think the right answers are not exactly what libertarians would say in every situation.
You, amazing how that happens. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one specific example is I would say that the before the financial crisis, I would say I had a pretty kind of monetary hawkish, sort of Austrian. I hadn't thought about it a lot, but just kind of had like a hard money kind of view of uh, macroeconomics. And then when the financial crisis happened, I expected there'd be a lot of inflation. And when that didn't happen, then I became kind of, I wasn't sure why, and felt like I needed to learn, read more and learn more. And ended up, I think I largely agree with Scott Sumner now, which I don't know, I don't think that's an unlibertarian position, but it's certainly different from the kind of, I would say, fairly simple views that some libertarians have about monetary policy. So yeah, it's not like an anti-libertarian position. It's just, I think, more complicated.
Okay. All right. So I think what I'd like to do is ask Elijah to unmute and kind of take over for a while questioning, and then if he's too nice to you, I'll come in and ask some really hostile questions.
All right.
Great to meet you, Tim.
Hi there.
I'm Elijah, and I'm excited to ask you some questions. So I've been looking at some of the things you've written about AI, even going back to 2017. You wrote for various outlets, Ars Technica, Vox, and a lot of your early reporting on AI kind of heavily focused on Google as the leader in that space. I'm wondering, were you surprised to see them fall behind Microsoft, and why you think that might have happened?
So I wouldn't really say they've fallen behind Microsoft. I mean, I think they've in some ways fallen behind OpenAI, and obviously OpenAI licensed its technology to Microsoft. So no, Microsoft has that edge in that relationship. I wouldn't say I'm super surprised. I mean, I wouldn't say I was paying close enough attention that I like kind of saw it coming necessarily. But I mean, I think a big part of it is just this is like a classic big company versus small company situation where Google So like the foundational breakthrough that made ChatGPT and a lot of the other current AI technologies possible was a technology called a transformer that was invented, I believe, in 2017 by Google researchers. There's a famous paper called "Attention is All You Need" that explains that architecture. And then a lot of people started using it, including OpenAI, and that is a big piece of GPT-3 and ChatGPT. And my understanding from talking to people at Google and just like the conventional view is that Google has a lot of good technology, but they just have not been good in turning it into a product. And I think there's a few factors in that. One is that their AI efforts are split among several different pieces. They have this startup called DeepMind that they acquired about 10 years ago, and that isn't really focused on making products. They do research and help Google with some of the internal stuff. There's a division called DeepBrain that's doing like internal Google research. I think there's various other products scattered around it. So they haven't been very focused, I think, on turning this into a consumer product. And I also think there's been a lot of risk aversion because, I mean, most of you have probably seen, like when Microsoft tried to turn ChatGPT into a product, the New York Times' Kevin Roose did a long chat with him where I tried to tell him to leave his wife and had all sorts of other like inappropriate comments. And so like this is a really difficult technology to use in a way that doesn't create like brand safety, brand risk problems. And so a big company like Google, especially a leader in search, if you're thinking about having to take by massively money-making search project and replace it or augment it with this untested new technology, they're going to be super risk averse. So I think that as long as Google felt they were comfortably the lead on AI, they didn't feel any pressure to make a new product. I think also there may have been like genuine like safety concerns in terms of, I think some people in this world generally think the AI is going to like take over the world and kill everybody. And so they were perfectly happy to kind of feel secure that they were the leaders at AI and not worry that much about turning into a product. And I think they were blindsided. I mean, I think OpenAI was not expecting ChatGPT to be the massive hit that it was. I think Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said that. And so I think the success of ChatGPT as a consumer product, where lots of people are using it, caught everybody, including Google and OpenAI, off guard. And now everybody's kind of scrambling. So it's clear this is not like a theoretical research problem anymore. There's going to be like real consumer products, and if they're not Google's products, it might be somebody else's products that then puts Google at a disadvantage.
And with that, I mean, all of these concerns about brand reputation and managing blowback to various things that AI might say. Do you think that has any implication for what the ultimate size of some of these AI-focused companies will have to be? I know Tyler Cowen has argued that companies will ultimately be able to manage with much smaller numbers of employees, but do you think the overhead is actually going to end up kind of being forced upward because of some of these things?
I think that's genuinely unclear. I think there's several different dimensions where that could affect how that shakes out. One is I don't think it's clear what the final product will be. I mean, the chatbot format may not be the one that's like really valuable, and there might be other, there might be other applications that are not chatbots that allow you to somehow constrain, like a tutor, for example, or like a more traditional search engine that kind of uses the large language model in the background somehow. And so I think if it continues to be a chatbot, I think there will be a large trust and safety team, or whatever they call it, that's doing work to kind of corral the responses to be in the realm of what people think is appropriate. And in the same way that like social media companies have had increasingly large staffs to deal with inappropriate content and kind of make it quote unquote safe. So I think that's definitely a possibility. I think there's also a question of architecturally whether these technologies continue to be to have the computational requirements they do now. So right now, the leading model from OpenAI, we don't know exactly how big it is, but it's like billions of parameters, and you need a really massive data center to run it. But what you've seen, for example, in the image space is a year or two ago, OpenAI released an image generator called DALL-E that was like that. It was, you needed a big data center to do it. And then a startup called Stability AI built their own version that I think was not quite as good, but was pretty close, and you could run it on your laptop. And so if that happens to these sorts of large language models and other AI tech things, then it might be just an app you run on your phone or your computer, and then maybe it's an open source app, so like nobody's in control of it. And in that case, maybe there's not the sort of brand reputation issues because maybe small startups can just ship it and just kind of say, do whatever you want with it. It's not our problem. So I think it's kind of unclear what the shape of this market, whether it's going to be one big company that kind of runs everything, whether it's going to be a lot of small apps, whether it's going to be like an everything app that, and then, depending on the structures, that would affect kind of how many people they need and what kind of roles are needed to make it a product that consumers like.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was surprised. I saw you tweeted recently that even something like Siri has like a pretty large team of people going through just all of the possible iterations of things that Siri might say. And
Right.
so it seems like it would be very low upkeep, but it's actually a pretty big labor intensive undertaking.
Yeah, well, so Siri and Alexa, and I'm not sure where Google Home is at this day, but certainly Siri and Alexa are very different technology, where they are, and it's just very much more primitive. Like they do basic speech recognition, that they use some AI to turn like your voice into text, but then the second half where they turn the text into doing something, like that's very simple. It's like pattern matching. And so that is extremely labor intensive because there's a whole team, like every possible thing that you say, there's somebody who, wrote some little program that says, if they say this, then do that. There's not like a large language model that's trying to generalize. And this is why, like Alexa, we have an Echo, and this is why Alexa is so dumb. Like you can't say things like, what's the artist of the song you just played, or play this song and then that plug. Like simple things you'd think after 10 years they would start to be able to have you do. It doesn't work. It's like a like a Unix command line where there's just certain commands you can do, and it knows how to do those, and it knows variations of them. So it's like a little bit, they just put a lot of work into having the many different ways you can say play this song or set this timer, but it's still a pretty simple, pretty brittle thing. And I think this is going to be a big challenge for both Apple and Amazon, as they have these big staffs built up and this technology framework built up to do this kind of simple thing. And it seems clear in the long run, voice assistants are going to be based on large language models, but doing that transition, both because you'd have to lay off a lot of people and like throw away a lot of this like existing expertise, but also then simultaneously you need to make sure that it doesn't like, use a racial slur to your 6-year-old or something. So like figuring out the safety problems at the same time you're like binning this like old system I think that's going to be a really hard transition for them. But I could totally see some startup or, some other company that's not currently in the voice market coming in and taking a big chunk of like Amazon's market share.
Gotcha. So maybe that's a good segue into something else you've written about, which is you've predicted that there won't ultimately be a lot of job loss caused by AI, at least in the kind of short to medium term.
Yeah.
What would lead you to change your mind about that? And is this maybe what you were just getting at here, speaking to like some pretty heavy churn, at least in some narrow kind of segments of the economy?
Yeah, so I mean, something I think people don't appreciate enough is there's always heavy churn in the economy. I mean, actually, in the 2000s, we went through a pretty major one. We opened up to trade with China, and as a result, there was a ton of layoffs. And people know this. Like a lot of people in the Midwest got laid off, and that was very hard on those people, and did cause some, I would say, a little bit of political blowback, and so it wasn't like an easy process. But the result was not like 20% unemployment, right? Like people did mostly find new jobs, and the people who had lower prices on their Chinese-made goods spent them on other things, which then created jobs in other fields. And so fundamentally, I see this as similar. So the reason I think people think this is different is they think, okay, in the past, we automated physical jobs, and so people moved to mental jobs, but now we're going to automate the mental jobs, and so there's going to be no jobs left. And I think that's just like not thinking very clearly or very like in much detail about what jobs actually look like these days. So there certainly are jobs like at my, I sit at my computer and write articles, like theoretically you can imagine that being completely replaced by an AI. But most people have jobs that involve interacting with other people or the physical world in a way that I think is currently just not up for automation. So in my piece, I talk about plumbers. It's not just that, plumbers need like a robot hand to like, manipulate pipes or whatever, but like, we have a multi-story house. If a plumber comes to my house, they need to go upstairs, which means a robot plumber would need to have like legs to climb upstairs, needs to be able to get in and out of cars, needs to be able to lift heavy objects, but also have like fine motor skills. And so like, even if you get the software perfect, we just do not have robots with those kind of capabilities. And then the other thing that I think is an even longer term thing is a lot of jobs where the job is to like to be a human. So like the clearest example is like childcare. Like I don't care how good a childcare robot becomes, like I want a human being taking care of my 2-year-old. And I think that's not because there's anything like specific a human being can do. It's just like, children like interacting with other children. And there's lots of other things like in the economy. Like if you go to a fancy restaurant, part of the experience is have a human being come and take your order, they bring you your food and ask is it okay. And there's just a lot of places where the kind of human provided version is the luxury version. You think about workouts, you think about live music, you get the recorded music for very cheap, but you have to pay a lot to see, Taylor Swift in concert. And so I think if a lot of other things get automated, we'll move to an economy where most people's jobs involve some version of hospitality, childcare, elder care, entertainment, therapy, massages. There's all sorts of ways that people provide services to other people, where being a human being is an inherent part of that. And I think even in the fastest case, that'll take 20 or 30 years, which is long enough, I think, that people will adjust. I mean, it's not gonna be easy, like the China shock was not easy, but I think it's gonna happen. So in terms of what would make me change my mind, I guess rapid progress in robotics would be the thing that would make me think that the change would be most dramatic. Or if like somebody really incompetent got in charge of the Fed, and like, I mean, it is possible to like plunge the company into a depression that causes mass unemployment, and then people might blame that on the robots, but it's not really about the robots. It's about like bad macroeconomic policy.
So you
Does that make
say,
sense?
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you say that being a human is inherent to a lot of these jobs. To me, it actually seems like there's kind of a social norm and expectation there that might be amenable to change, at least over a long enough time horizon. So maybe AI just proliferates to the point where people are using it all the time and communicating with like a much better version of Alexa or Siri. And it doesn't happen right away, of course, but people get maybe more comfortable doing things with AI that they normally would have done with humans. And then at 20, 30, 50 years, it doesn't seem so crazy to have robots do your childcare, or I mean, to have AI do, some of these human type things like, be your therapist, and that could be totally software based.
Right. So I think there's something inherent about, so if you think about luxury goods, what makes a luxury good is it's scarce, right? The luxury good is a thing that has a thing that the other products don't have. And so at different times of time, that could be like expensive fabrics or, gold or whatever. But like as manufacturing gets better and as like technology gets better, there are fewer and fewer things that are scarce. But the one thing that's always going to be scarce is other people's time, because other people have their own, other people's incomes. Hopefully everybody's incomes going up. So the more incomes go up, the more expensive, wages are relative to everything else. And so I think a lot of these things, like people's preferences, I think adjust based on, what's not is not scarce. And it's not that every restaurant is necessarily going to have a lot of people serving it. Or, I mean, there are like exercise videos and workout apps, and those will get better. And in the future, you have your Pelotons. In the future, maybe 90, 95% of people will still do that. But there's always going to be the most expensive version is going to be the one with the humans. And there's going to be a certain number of people who feel they get status from getting the most expensive version of the thing. And different people have different, preferences. Like some rich people might be like, I don't care about going to in-person workout, I'll use an app. But there's going to be the high-end version is always going to be the human version because it uses the scarce resource. And I think probably, there's going to be some people who prefer that high-end version. As we get richer and richer, there'll be enough people who want the high-end version that there'll still be jobs for people that want them.
Okay, I'm going to actually break in because I've been accumulating some questions. First of all, in economics, GPT used to stand for general purpose technology. Is this one?
So there is a paper you might have seen called GPT is a GPT that sort of answers this question.
Title.
Yeah. And I forget, I just skimmed it, but it went through, got it on my desk here. But anyway, yeah, they went through a bunch of different professions and tried to estimate the range of professions that were like, I forget how they put it, but like affected by this. There's a database, I forget the name of the database, that like breaks occupations down to like simple tasks. And then based on that, they try to for each task, they said, could you do this with a language model? And I forget the exact number, but they found that like something close to half, I think, of jobs had tasks that would be affected by large language models. So certainly I think it's a lot of professions are going to be affected. I'm not actually sure what the I don't know, is there like a like official definition of GPT that I should be thinking of? I mean I think it's basically just has a lot of applications across a lot of different industries, right? Is the basic concept.
Well, yeah, I think it's more of a, rather than a formal definition, a sort of a empirical definition that, well, look at electricity and look at all the things that it
Right.
enabled. And
Right.
does, or look at the World Wide Web and look at what that enabled. Is this, of that order, or is it of a lower order, I guess?
Yeah. And so I guess I think there's probably two pieces. One is like, is it going to be used across a lot of different industries and products and stuff? But also, can you use it as a building block to build other things, right? The electric grid, you could use a lot of different electric appliances and types of factories and stuff. And it sure seems like it. I mean, so not necessarily large language model, but if you think of neural networks, the kind of underlying, the technology that powers large language models, they're using it for large language models. They're using it for image generation. They're using it for sound generation. They're going to use it to generate videos soon. They use it for facial recognition. So like any kind of like information processing task that you can think of, they're building deep neural networks, and most of them are getting like very impressive pace of improvement. So yeah, I mean, I think it's probably anything that was touched by computers over the last 50 years is probably going to be significantly affected by AI over the next, say, 20.
And what would be the accomplishments it could have, or the sort of area that could take over, like 1 or 2, 3 areas where it could have a big impact that would be most impressive to you, that would make you feel like, yeah, this thing deserved its hype because it redid blank, blank, and blank.
So I mean, I think the places where there's several places. So I think one is the kind of professional occupations. If you think about accountants, management consultants, lawyers, those kind of professions, I don't think it'll be completely replaced. So all of those jobs, part of the job is to like have a relationship with the client, and the client's probably still going to want a lawyer or accountant or whatever to talk to. But I could imagine in 10 years, like the legal profession be much different, where a lot of the stuff we have human lawyers doing now, a lot of, document review and writing first drafts of memos and stuff like that. And even legal research of like, what are the relevant cases for this? Just all of that being replaced by some kind of chatbot or search engine or something, where the computer just knows all the case law and knows, can like write a contract is based on a chat and stuff like that. So that would be one category of like all those kind of white collar professions. I could imagine very big changes. I think one of the big question marks is like education. Like, I don't think that colleges are going to go away, but I do think the vision of like having a very high quality tutor that's available to everybody, that's maybe used in conjunction with going to school, or in some cases instead of going to school, that seems very possible to me. And I've seen some claims that, and this is something I've looked into very closely, but I've heard some claims that like that kind of intensive tutoring, like one-on-one tutoring, can allow students to progress much more quickly than traditional classroom. And so if you can implement that in a chatbot format, it could potentially have like big improvements in education. So that seems pretty promising and exciting.
Yeah, just if I can remember, that's the one that I think, if it did nothing else, but, because I keep coming up with ideas like, suppose I were teaching AP economics today, or a high school economics class. I would love to just have it be every week the students look at a period of economic history, including the economic thought during that history. So you could take them all the way back to, what was the economics of the hunter-gatherers, and then the Bronze Age, and then, the agriculture, and just all the way through things. It would just be, the Industrial Revolution, and then you take smaller and smaller bites as you get closer to the present. I could see like a team of 4 students, every week just developing, a sort of a chapter of economic history, and just I think it would just be so much deeper and faster than anything that, than just starting out with, here's a supply and demand curve. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so two other industries. Healthcare, I think, is an interesting one. It's like I don't write that much about healthcare because it's so complicated in its own thing. But so I don't think it's going to completely transform the like healthcare delivery. But like one thing that's happened is that the transformer, the kind of architecture that, or the algorithm that underlies a lot of these breakthroughs, was used to solve the protein folding problem. So if you've got a DNA sequence, a thing that biologists would like to do is predict what will be the structure of the protein that corresponds to that DNA sequence. And this is something that scientists struggled with for decades and decades. And then a couple of years ago, a team at DeepMind just solved it with a new neural network, and they have the structures for millions of proteins now. I don't know enough about biochemistry to know like how big of a breakthrough that is, but that seems like probably that's going to help with a lot of drug discovery or other kinds of medical things. And I could also imagine a lot of diagnostic things, the kind of work that radiologists or pathologists do, that probably, image recognition algorithms will improve that. New vaccines, I don't know. It seems like there must be a lot of ways kind of on the back end of healthcare that we can have a lot of new technologies and devices and diagnostics techniques.
Yeah, just helping the administrative side and that part of the
Sure.
back
Yes,
end.
absolutely.
But yeah, all right, let me do one more question. Then I'll turn it back
Uh-huh.
to Elijah for a few minutes, then we'll go to the audience. But
Right.
so I wanted to talk about the downside. So it seems to me like, Silicon Valley came to us with cryptocurrencies, and that hype cycle is kind of on the back end. The
Mhm.
metaverse, that was going to be this big thing, and not. How is there a scenario in which these large language models and the related AI, a year from now, we're saying, we all got too excited, or Silicon Valley, it was like Lucy and the football, took the football away again.
Mhm.
Is that a likely scenario? If so, if not, why not?
I don't think it's very likely. I mean, I think the big unsolved issue is that language models are not designed to tell you things that are true. They tell you things that are likely. Fundamentally what they do is you give it the start of a sentence, and it predicts what the most likely finish of that sentence is. And sometimes the most likely sentence is a true fact about whatever you're asking a question about. But sometimes it doesn't know, or it's just contradictory information or whatever. And so it'll just make something up. And so that obviously limits its utility for a lot of applications. And it seems like something, probably there are ways to fix that, but I don't think anybody has fully figured that out. And so I think that's a big question, is will we be able to figure that out? I mean, I think there are some places where that doesn't matter that much, where, having a first, what I think that would do is it would mean that that you need a human being to look over the output, but it's still often quite useful. It's something generates a first draft or a list of brainstorm ideas that still save you some work. So I think that's the most way, if it appears to be overhyped. The other like model I think is worth thinking about is like social media, which I do not think was overhyped in the sense that like people really used it and it had a big impact on the world, but I think it's debatable whether it's had a positive impact. I mean, you've seen disruption in the political system and a rise in teen depression and things like that. And I think you could have some of the same, actually basically the same things. I mean, there's going to be a ton of, fake. We now have the technology to generate completely fake audio, video, images that could be used for all sorts of nefarious purposes. And also these chatbots, you could imagine them being used to, encourage people to harm themselves, or, being used in scams, stuff like that. And so I think there's going to be a downside to these technologies that overall, I think it's probably going to be positive, but it's going to be such a big change in kind of how we interact with the world and understand the world, that it certainly could have big downsides. And maybe we'll look back in 5 or 10 years and say, overall, we're not sure this was such a great thing for the world.
Okay, Elijah, you have a couple more good ones, and before we go to the rest of the people.
Yeah, picking up on that last one, what odds would you give for voice cloning and deepfake technology having a significant impact as soon as the next presidential election?
Oh, I think it's a very, very possible. And I don't think, I feel a lot of uncertainty about this, because there's both the like explicit deep fakes of like somebody just creates a video of like Joe Biden saying something he didn't say, like that obviously could have a big impact. But also the ability to churn out sort of customized propaganda, where maybe every voter gets a micro-targeted message that maybe contains information that isn't true or is misleading or whatever. I mean, we saw some of that in the social media area, but the model there was like people would like hire a bunch of low paid people to like generate propaganda. But now if you can automate it, so yeah, I think it's absolutely possible that we'll have a lot of information out there that's not accurate that will affect the 2024 election. Yeah, I don't know where that'll go.
I was struck by there was a 3 or 4 week period where I hadn't realized that all of the AI generated like Pope content, I didn't realize that was 100% totally fake. Like I thought
Yeah.
there was some base image that was actually true, that he'd actually, worn the Balenciaga coat. And then I was kind of caught off guard because I'm very online. I'm very plugged into a lot of things, and a lot of voters, of course, are not really plugged in at all. So
yeah,
probably they could be deceived.
You also saw this when when rumors were swirling about Donald Trump's about to be arrested. There were a lot of fake images put out of the arrest several days before it actually happened, and some conspiracy theories then saying like, oh, it was really a setup. Like, they thought that these images were genuine, and like, they had like staged them and were planning to release them later. I mean, there's all, so I think it's really going to create. And in fact, actually today I was just seeing there was some leaked video of like Tucker Carlson saying something negative about Fox News, and I'm genuinely unsure if that's real or not, because I wasn't familiar with the publication that published it. Somebody absolutely could make a fake video of Tucker Carlson saying whatever they want Tucker Carlson to say. And if Tucker Carlson doesn't acknowledge it's real, and I don't trust the source of publishing, like, I don't know. Like, so any of these leaked videos, like we've had a lot of scandals involving leaked audio or video. Both there's a risk to be fake, but also if it's real, the person can say it's fake, and on some level nobody's ever going to know. So it's going to really change, I think, the way a lot of these controversies play out.
And what happens if one of the political parties or part of one of the political parties jumps in and says, no, that's real, like the other side is covering that up, like they're telling you it's fake, but no, it's like you have to believe it. Or
Yes.
Or, what if something, the timing is just perfect, like it comes right before the election and there's not time to figure out what's going on. It seems.
Yeah. I mean, I do think to some extent this is a change of degree rather than kind. So you do have, for example, political ads. There was, I think there was a famous political ad that purported to show like people pouring across the southern border, and it was all actually a border, like in some other, country. Or they had, I think they took a video of Hillary Clinton and slowed it down so she looked drunk. So like there are other like tricks like political operatives could play to mislead people that are short of like actually fabricating video, and these have been happening as long as I've been social media. So this is going to be worse, but it's not going to be like a totally new thing, and people are just going to have to learn to apply a very high level of skepticism and to use other methods like understanding where the content came from to figure out if it's genuine. But a lot of voters are bad at that, so it's not going to be pretty.
Okay, can we let anyone who wants to like raise a virtual hand, or I might even see if somebody holds up a hand. All right, so Ernie, go ahead and unmute. You haven't unmuted yet. Nope.
Lower left, there's an unmute button.
Oh, is that better?
There we go. Yeah.
Now we go.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. One, you mentioned in one of your articles about Ball-E, which is Google's image AI. And Bloomberg had a long story on the Swedish, I think it's Swedish, high school professor has developed the open source image database that most of the AIs have been trained on.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people it's relative to this last question about political statements, and there have been arguments that these AI should be regulated, and in particular databases that they get trained on, and if somebody annotates or quotes the source or states the source of their information.
Right.
And the people that developed this database are pretty hesitant about regulation because of the anti-competitive nature, where the big firms could write the regulations, and then they would put up barriers to entry to smaller firms. So I'd like to know if you thought about that or are thinking about it now.
So are you thinking
And,
about regulation in a copyright context or in terms of
copyrights, as well as if you publish something, a photograph or something like that, you have to also publish where your information came from, the source of the data itself.
Right. So in terms of copyright, I wrote a long article about this. I think it's genuinely unclear what the law is because there's a concept called fair use that allows use of copyrighted images under certain circumstances. And one of the classic cases was Google Books. They scanned a bunch of books to make a book search engine, and the courts eventually ruled that was fair use. So the companies making these AI products would like to say that same precedent applies. But I think there's enough differences between those cases that the courts may or may not go along with that. I don't have a strong view about which way I would like them to rule. I think there are, generally speaking, I'm kind of a fan of fair use, but I do think that if you're an artist and this company takes all of your artworks and uses it to generate new art that might look a lot like your artwork, I can see why you'd be upset about that. So I don't have a strong view on kind of what the position should be. In terms of attributing the source of information, this is very difficult because the way these AI systems work, they take in large quantities of information, and it isn't like they have a big database in there where they have all the images stored and just kind of pull a few out to mix up. It's much more complicated than that, and I don't think there's any really meaningful way to say these are the 5 images that generated this image. It's really a mix of all of them in a way that's hard to characterize. So I don't think that's possible technically, and I definitely wouldn't want to require it. I think it also, you could imagine having laws that say, either, make it a crime to create deep fakes or restrict the tools so that, try to make it hard to use them. I think that's also difficult, partly because some of these tools are going to be open source, and so anybody can download them and use them. And I don't think we'd want to make it illegal to make them open source, and I don't think there's a way to regulate what people do on their own laptops. So I think we're probably just going to be stuck with a lot more of this kind of thing, and I think it's going to be hard to do much about it.
I wonder if Lee Bresler, you want to speak a little. You've had some views on sort of, kind of on that I think relate to that, and then if you had another question, go ahead.
Thanks, Arnold, and thanks, Timothy.
Right.
So on the first point, I've been posing the question, and I don't have a good answer to it, but I've asked everyone from my kids to a bunch of very interesting and accomplished professionals. If you could train an AI model on say everything in Spotify, and then you said, make me a song that sounds like the lyrics of the Foo Fighters and the music of Aerosmith and, with the guitar of Metallica or something, would that violate copyright law? And I've gotten a lot of different answers, ranging from definitely yes to definitely no. But one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, and I've written about, including today, was that I think you're going to see the big AI companies white label their models and sell them to companies with large IP catalogs. Imagine a Warner Music or something that wants to use an AI model, but without the risk that the data is contaminated by something that could create a license issue. So that way, if they make a song, they can say, well, no, you can't sue us and tell us that we violated copyright because the model that we used to make the song wasn't even trained on whatever you're suggesting. So it's not possible. So I've written quite a bit about this, and I raised my hand because I'm very curious your take on this, and specifically on white labeling of AI models and what that could look like, and on where you think sort of these content generation industries, whether it's music or books or TV at some point as the tech gets better, where those could head in terms of creating customized content. And then I'll just throw this out there so I don't have to raise my hand again, which is, if there's anyone who you're familiar with who's like an IP lawyer or someone who's doing really interesting work on this topic specifically, I'd love to just know a name and try to talk to that person as well. But that'd be great if you know someone.
Sure. So last question first. So my very first piece that I wrote back in March was focused on this question, and I cite and quote a couple different people. So if you take a look at that, that would be the people. James Germelman is one of them. But yeah, you could look at that for those names. In terms of white labeling, I think first and foremost, this depends on what the courts say. If the courts say it's fair use, which they very well might, then all this is kind of a moot point. All these companies will keep doing whatever they want, and it'll be kind of a free for all. If the plaintiffs win in these cases, then it's going to be very disruptive. A lot of these companies will have to stop using the models they have now, and they'll have to build new models. I would expect the biggest companies to start spending a lot of money to license. Like Getty is one of the plaintiffs. I assume Getty will start signing deals with AI companies where they get paid a lot of money to train on their models. I absolutely think in that case, and actually either way, it probably would make sense for the big entertainment companies to pay somebody to build them a custom model that's just their IP, and then they can do stuff like this. I mean, you already see a little bit of this. So like James Earl Jones recently signed a deal for the use of his voice. He's the voice of Darth Vader. He signed a deal that allows the use of his voice AI generated for future Star Wars movies. And so I think he's like 90. So after he dies, his voice will still be the voice of Darth Vader, possibly forever. So I think you'll see some of that. The economics could get really weird because I think you'll have some so Grimes, the musician, recently said that she will split royalties 50-50 with anybody who creates a new piece of music with her voice. It's not clear if artists have some sort of copyright or other right in their voice. So I don't, again, that's something that probably future litigation or maybe future legislation will settle. And it's also not clear what customers will want. So it definitely would be possible that the scenario you talked about where you create a custom piece of music that mashes up different artists. There's definitely going to be software that can do that in just a few years if it doesn't exist already. But I think a lot of what customers like about listening to music is feeling a connection with a particular artist. And so there might not be that much of a market for, totally original art music made by some algorithm, because really what people like is hearing songs they're already familiar with by artists they already know so that they can then go to the concert. And so it might not end up actually affecting that much because there's already far more music than anybody can listen to. And the value of a marginal song is very, very low. It's just there's a few people that people are already passionate about. So yeah, it could go a lot of different ways. I think it's going to be really interesting to see.
It really gets to a topic that I think we talked about in one of Arnold's previous seminars quite a long time ago about the topic of authenticity and the value of authenticity, right? And do you, when something is perceived as authentic, do you care about it more? When the song is actually made by Taylor Swift, do you care more? There are famous artists like Drake. Ben Thompson has a podcast called Dithering, where he and John Gruber talk a lot about this stuff. And he mentioned on his podcast that Drake has acknowledged that writing his songs is not something he does, that's just like it's done by a committee of people, and then they just sort of hand him a sheet of words and he sings them and memorizes them. But I guess so already people don't care. They still listen to Drake music and nobody cares that this is like Drake crooning or rapping about something. Like, it's just nobody cares about it,
right? And you can imagine like new categories of products, right? So maybe Taylor Swift like sings you happy birthday, and like maybe you probably know that she didn't really do that, but it sounds exactly right. I mean, the potential for like porn is obvious, right? Like you could have OnlyFans where you can have like one-on-one chat with like whatever like licensed actress you want. So like it's kind of hard to say like how like customers' attitudes about what's real and what's fake. It'll get much more complicated, and there'll be situations where the customer's not sure, like, is this a real video or is it like a fake video that's like just uses the IP of that person?
Yeah, this goes all the way back to Cyrano de Bergerac.
Yes, exactly.
You'll see people in bars with someone whispering in their ear, but it's a chat bot whispering in their ear what their what their pickup line should be.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Tom's had his hand up for a while. Tom Gray, you want to?
Hi, Tom.
Hi, Timothy. Or do you like Tim better?
Either one's fine. Tim is good.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about whether you followed the divestment by IBM of the Watson Medical. IBM invested, $5 billion into Watson, and medical was going to be the big breakthrough, and it didn't happen. And it seems to me like they weren't following the transformer technology; they were doing a different technology.
Yeah.
But they were pushing accuracy, and what I haven't heard from you or anybody is hooking up large language models as the user interface to people connected to other accuracy-based AI. You sort of mentioned it, but looking for accuracy, but having the, doing the back end, getting the facts right, but the language model doing the user interface.
Right.
So those are related questions. The divestment of medical by IBM of Watson.
Right. So I had not seen the news about the divestment. My understanding is that Watson was as much a marketing term as it was a technology. I mean, Watson was originally a Jeopardy answering chat robot technology. And then because that got so much publicity, Watson became the brand name for whatever IBM's like cutting edge. So I don't know that the Jeopardy answering thing and the medical thing were using the same technology at all. I think they might have been totally different ones. That's what they called it. But yeah, neither one of them were using transformers or even I think deep learning. It was using kind of earlier AI that I think probably didn't work as well. I would say that the accuracy problems with large language models, I think, are specific to large language models and not necessarily transformers. So I mentioned, for example, the protein folding. That's another application where it uses transformers, but not. So the reason the large language models are so unreliable is the way they were trained is they basically took the whole internet and used that as their training set and tried to predict what's the next word on the whole internet. The whole internet has a ton of stuff. Some of it's not accurate. And it's not kind of curated in any way. And so
a good example of that is what happens if you break a model, break a mirror, and there's different answers, but the best one is, 7 years of bad luck.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and so it's just kind of a garbage in, garbage out kind of thing. I think you'd use the same kind of techniques with a much more curated set of examples where all the answers are correct, and that might give you better results. And I think particularly for like medical diagnostics, for example, I think there are you can use deep learning, but not necessarily large language models or transformers. There's like other algorithms that I think you should be able to get better accuracy. And so I think some of these I think there are better techniques for some of those kind of diagnostic applications. This should work pretty well. I don't know the details of why, if and why IBM's hasn't worked out, but I do expect that's going to be coming pretty soon if it's not here already.
Okay,
Thanks
John
for the
A.
question.
John A, you have a hand up.
Yeah, I have two quick questions. And Arnold and Tim, thank you, Tim, for fascinating conversation.
Sure.
Then Tim, they're for both of you. So the first is Arnold has a pithy dictum that we decide what to believe by deciding first whom to believe. And so I present that as a question. What are the implications of that view of epistemology for AI and deep fakes and all of that? And my second question is about disruption of education, because that's often mentioned as a mature and large industry that might be ripe for disruption by AI. And question about education is, to what extent must one already be an educated person in order to use ChatGPT or other new in the pipeline forms of AI effectively? My initial impression is that you know, to use it well in education, you must to some extent already be educated. I'm saying that from the trenches. I teach it at the graduate level.
You mean because you need to be able to check if the answers are accurate?
Or
Just
just-
the back and forth that makes for an effective conversation with the
I
tool.
see, yeah.
And just knowing what a good question is. I mean, that's what strike, like, there's been some initial statements that this GPT works to level people up. Like there was this study of call center people and said that the people at the bottom end were leveled up. And I've heard computer people say, well, I'm an expert programmer. I could use this occasionally, but the people who are really not very expert could use this a lot. And my instinct is kind of the opposite. When I read about somebody's clever use of these language models, I think, boy, what a clever person. Sort of goes with John's idea that, so the real know-how is knowing what kind of question to ask or what kind of problem to pose or what kind of idea to generate. And that might be, it might really, again, empower somebody who's really educated. And again, when I go back to my fantasy of this high school class where I'm sort of coaching kids to develop, an economic, historical approach to learning economics, I would think that a lot of what they would get out of that would be process. That is, that they would be learning how to learn using one of these language models. So anyway, that's my initial reaction.
So my so a nuance to understand about large language models is there's kind of two phases to how they were developed. So the original, the GPT-2, GPT-3, the way those worked is they were just document completion systems. So the idea was you would give it, say, the beginning of a news article, the first sentence, and it would guess what the second and third one was. And you could do this for any kind of document. You could use it for, websites or recipes or whatever. But it wasn't like a chatbot. And then what they did is they gave it an additional set of examples that were specifically like, here's what a good chat looks like. And then with that additional kind of guidance, it then became a chatbot because it learned that this is the format we're looking for. And so my guess is that for some of the applications we're talking about, for a tutoring app or for something that helps somebody on a call center, you would do that second step differently. You would still do the large language model to give it kind of the system kind of a basic understanding of language, but then you'd say you'd have human beings generate, say, 100,000 transcripts of like, here's what a good tutoring session looks like. You train it on that, and then it becomes a tutor. And so then it would be, I think people were saying earlier, it's kind of passive. Current ChatGPT, you have to know the questions to ask, but you can certainly imagine a chatbot that works the other way, where you log in and it immediately starts, quizzing you or asking you to, whatever, doing what a tutor would do. Similarly, you could imagine a much more focused system and I think a lot of companies are working on this now, where in the call center, there's a chatbot that just knows about the company's products and, has an interface that's really optimized so that you don't have to be smart. It just says, it just is optimized for the use of people in call centers. So I think there's going to be a lot of different versions of this technology, and that each one of them will be custom designed for a particular application. And hopefully that will make them more useful than the kind of general chatbot in a way that will allow kind of leveling up people with less skills.
Yeah.
The deep fakes and epistemology and whom to believe and whom.
Oh yeah, so the deepfakes, that's a good example. So something that I found useful to think about this is it's long been possible to make deepfakes of texts, right? If you see a screenshot of an email or a tweet and somebody says, someone said, tweeted this outrageous thing, we know that you can easily fake a tweet. And so you ask other questions. You say, who uploaded this? Does the person it's supposedly from, confirm or deny that it's real? Is there other circumstantial evidence that this happened, et cetera, et cetera? And so, that's just how you deal with media that's easy to fake. And so I think we're going to have to do the same thing with other media forms. And that, as you said, that's a lot about how you trust, because the question is like, what was the chain of custody of this media? Was it from you know, a media source I trust, or was it were there other people who heard this alleged conversation or were present when this alleged video was taken that can confirm that it was true or say it wasn't? And so yeah, it's going to be that's going to be a bigger part of media going forward than it has been in the past.
Arnold?
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess if I could see sort of a, you know, red queen rat race between people, you know, sort of things learning to fake and things learning to be genuine, and sort of, you know, you end up saying, well, I trust this company to have really careful biometrics that'll distinguish the real Arnold Kling from a bunch of fake Arnold Klings. And then if that company lets me down, God help me, you know, it's sort of
Right.
like, I mean, it's sort of like if Gmail gave away all of my stored email, you know,
Yep.
God
The-
help
and
me.
there are some technological precautions that I think will be taken. One thing you can do is you can have cameras produce some sort of digital signature that says this photo was taken with this kind of camera at this time. And I mean, there's like privacy issues because you don't necessarily want to reveal all that information, but there may be ways to kind of have a digital chain of custody that goes with the photo where you won't necessarily know everything about it, but you can at least have a way to start the detective process and say, you know, this claims it was produced at this location at this time, but actually the like digital timestamp says something else, and so that might be one way to help people like you know, detect when something's real or fake. But right now we don't have that infrastructure yet.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
just Elijah, do you have one or two last questions to throw at him?
Not really. I think
Okay,
if there's maybe a last audience question, that might be.
Did I answer all the questions?
so we now know everything about the future of AI. Is that?
I guess so.
Yeah.
I-
Okay, well, that's great.
Well,
Okay, sorry, Ernie, go
I
ahead.
have one thing to add. We haven't talked about it yet, but there are second order effects from changing jobs. Everyone's comparative advantage is going to shift, especially if you eliminate jobs where people are highly educated or involved in things. They may become plumbers, and the plumbers have nowhere to go. And we haven't really talked about those kind of second order effects. And when you look at the population, for example, plumbers make up 1% of the workforce. Electricians make up about 0.7% of the workforce. So it wouldn't take many people, a big effect on another thing, to completely wipe those people out as good plumbers and good electricians. And it's those kind of effects that I'm concerned about more than the direct effects on a particular profession.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's absolutely a legitimate concern. Like I think the pace of the transition really matters, because if this is something that happens over 20 or 30 years, you know, you have natural kind of people age out, right? People retire, people have plenty of notice to not go into a new profession that's kind of in decline. If it happens over 5 or 10 years, that could be more disruptive. So yeah, I think it's absolutely, I hope it doesn't happen too fast. And yeah, but it is going to create some strains for individual people. I mean, hopefully I think there'll be some organizational inertia that'll help in a lot of these things. So if somebody invented a chatbot tomorrow that could do everything every lawyer would do, like companies wouldn't all lay off their lawyers right away, because it'll take them a few years to decide they can trust it, and then a few more years to learn how to use the software. And for a while, you know, the lawyer's job will be to help people use the chatbot. And so I think there'll be this won't be something. A lot of these jobs are things where it'll be pretty gradual, even if the technology moves very quickly. But yeah, it's going to be crazy, and certainly there will be some people who are not going to be happy with the results. I do think one thing I'm kind of optimistic about is I do think that there's a good chance it will compress wages somewhat, because if this affects white collar work more than blue collar work, you know, for the last 50 years or so, college educated people have made significantly more than blue collar people, and I think that's created some kind of strains where there's been, I think, maybe more resentment between the social classes. And if you end up in a world where electricians and plumbers see their wages rising quickly and white collar workers see their wages stagnate, I mean, obviously the white collar workers won't be thrilled about that, but in the long run, I think we could have a kind of more equal society without any sort of like government redistribution, just as like the market starts demanding a broader range of goods and services.
There are many theories of the Great Depression, just as there are many theories of the Industrial Revolution. And one possible theory that probably has very few adherents is that it was a big job transformation. In 1929, there were physical cigar rollers. People, a human being rolled a cigar. There
Uh-huh.
were human glass blowers. Every light bulb was blown by a human being. By
Mhm.
1949, none of the, all those things had changed. And what happened to the cigar rollers and glass blowers is that they were unemployed for a while, and then they aged out of the labor force, and new people came in with new jobs.
Yeah.
So those transitions do happen, and if a transition is like that one, it'll be very disruptive. Obviously, if it
Yeah.
happens more slowly and more smoothly, then it'll be less disruptive.
And this is part of why I think macroeconomics is really important for this, because I think that story and the kind of more standard story that there was like there's too much monetary tightening work together, because if there'd been a looser economy, there would have been more new jobs being created, and at least some of those people would have been able to shift into new industries. I think a similar thing is true after 2008. There was a long period where there was inadequate demand, and so the people that were losing their jobs as a result of outsourcing to China, there just weren't that many jobs for them to shift into. Whereas if we'd had more of a booming economy, it would have been a smoother thing. And so I think it's always the case that good macroeconomic policy is particularly important at times when there's a lot of shifting in demand due to technological change.
Okay, well, now we've circled back to that. I think that's a good place to end. I'd like to thank Tim for a very insightful conversation, and Elijah for doing some good background research to motivate some good questions, and the audience for asking good questions as well.
All right, thank you so much. The website's understandingai.org if anybody's interested in my future articles.
Or just if you Google Timothy Lee AI Substack, I'm sure you'll end up with something.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, thank
You'll end up with
Thank you,
full
Tim.
stack economics, but thanks a lot, Tim.
you. Sounds good. Thanks a lot.
Okay, there it is.
There it is.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.